Welcome to Take the Weight Out of Weight Loss with your host, Natasha D'Souza. Here we'll be discussing the challenges and strategies for managing emotional eating and achieving sustainable weight loss. Join us as we explore the science and psychology behind emotional eating and weight loss while learning how to make lasting changes in your life. Hi everyone, and welcome back to Take the Weight Out of Weight Loss with Natasha. Today I have a very, very special guest with me. Someone that's going to be talking about a topic which is very close to my heart. Some of you know I've shared this on my social media as well before. We're going to be speaking today to Nusrat Khan. And Nusrat, I don't want to jumble your introduction, so I really want you to give us the formal introduction, including title, including your area of speciality. So first of all, welcome.
Thank you, Natasha. Thank you.
Most welcome. And please, if you could formally introduce yourself to us.
Right. Thank you for this invite. I'm really honored to be here with you.
My pleasure.
And for the amazing work that you're doing. I really appreciate it. I think the community needs this work that you are actually doing. So for all of you, I am Nusrat Khan. And I'm a clinical psychologist, a licensed clinical psychologist. And right now, I'm practicing with Human Relation Institute and clinics in Dubai. At the same time, since last almost 15 years, I'm also a founder of an organization called Cactus Foundation, which is a non-profit that I run in India. And one more thing that I want to add to my title is I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And not just a survivor, I think I'm a warrior today. I fiercely advocate for prevention of this. And my specialty as a psychologist is trauma and resolving the trauma. And because trauma is the base of every, I would say, mental health issue that people struggle with. Right. So I have almost over more than 2 decades of experience, alhamdulillah. And I'm still learning, still discovering stories, honoring people in that safe space. Yeah, so that's about me.
And this is why I gave you the room to say that title, because you've done such a brilliant job at it. And I'm actually honored to be here with you. I know we had a phone call a very long time ago.
Yeah, a long time.
And on that phone call, the tears that filled my eyes when you were telling me the work that you do, I'm going to try not to be an emotional basket case today, but I was truly just amazed, because
Thank you so much.
having gone through sexual trauma myself, having it had led to coping mechanisms and how much it impacted my life, I was ashamed for so many years to talk about it, so many years. I had to wait till I was after 30. But the freedom that I have experienced in the past 4 years, ever since opening up, has been life-changing. And it made me realize that how many women are out there, even men for that matter, right?
Absolutely.
Out there going through years of having to deal with this guilt, the shame, know. I sat with that. I sat with that guilt. And I remember it happened to me when I was so young. And till I was 29, I would say, maybe if I didn't wear that skirt when I was playing, it wouldn't have happened to me. But it doesn't boil down to that.
You won't believe, Natasha, when I say this, that I practiced for almost 8 to 9 years, and I was helping CSA victims in their journey to heal. And in spite of that powerful role that I was playing day in and day out, I wasn't acknowledging my own abuse till I turned 31. Wow. And I so resonate with everything that you have mentioned, that it kind of liberates you. And I recognized that when I gave birth to my first child. And that's when it hit me. And that's when this entire work, the nonprofit, came into picture. And it was a mess initially. And that was the point, that if I'm working in this field, I'm helping people, but I'm not acknowledging my own, the root of my trauma. How does that make sense? And there may be so many people, the way you said, men and women, I'm sure they're still struggling. Even if you're watching this episode, I'm sure there are so many of you struggling with this. But if you find a safe space, you shouldn't be stopping yourself, because that is definitely liberating.
Absolutely. So can we get down to the basics, please? So as far as trauma goes, we can go along the lines of sexual trauma as well. How does it impacts one's ability. I look at it as a stint in your development. That's how I've experienced it. And I've noticed it with my friends and family that have not gone through this. The way I look at the world is very different from the way they look at the world, And so what does that do to a young individual, an adolescent that has gone through trauma in any shape or form? And what does that kind of look like for them?
It's a very important question, a very relevant one. And I'm not going to use a lot of scientific jargon for the audiences to understand it. It's very important to know that trauma is not just like Dr. Geber Mate says that, right? It's not about what happens to you. It's more about what happens inside of you.
Yeah.
So whether you consider the physical or the physiological impact of it, where there are so many, brain neural pathways are affected. There is an issue with the way the body develops. So there is a physical impact, there is a cognitive impact, and there is also an emotional impact of the trauma. And when we talk about trauma, we cannot isolate and these connections, the physiological or the emotional and the cognitive impact, they are all like interlinked. Okay, so you can't be segregating. So you may see symptoms, more of emotional symptoms, and you may discount the physiological symptoms until probably you reach your 30s or 40s, and then you get a diagnosis of BP or sugar or some issue, and then you kind of start working on it. So it does affect every individual. There is no such individual on this earth where they've been through trauma and it has not affected them.
Yeah.
And sometimes we see that, he's not bothered that his mom passed away so soon or some trauma happening. And we have these judgments and labels that we throw at children, young adolescents. But to be very honest, these individuals are then on a survival mode. Yeah. They are on an autopilot mode. And the way you mentioned, yes, it changes the way you perceive the world. You either become very hyper vigilant or you become hypo vigilant. Okay, so there is emotional dysregulation happening there. The HPA axis in the brain, that is the hypothalamus and the pituitary and the adrenal axis that responds to stress, that also changes, causing significant, changes in the brain as well. Yeah. So at every level, I would say every cell of your body in a way gets affected with trauma, but you don't realize it unless you cross that bridge, unless you see some symptom that is extremely alarming. And you start viewing the world as unsafe. That is a very important thing.
Yeah.
There are trust issues and all of it, but you're like literally scanning and searching for threats.
Yeah.
And that puts you on the edge all the time.
You're saying that, and my body's trembling a little bit because that was me in a nutshell.
Yeah.
I would walk around saying, oh, they're going to do something bad to me. And what if they do something bad to me? And what if that? Everything felt unsafe,
Absolutely.
And that whole survival mode, I was stuck in freeze.
Yeah.
There were times I knew what I had to do. I knew, my list was, but I couldn't move.
Yes,
I was just stuck. And for years, I was labeled as lazy. My mom would say, you're so lazy,
yes.
Natasha, but she never knew what happened, right? I thought I was lazy because that was the label. And I would beat myself up thinking, my God, I know what I need to do, but I cannot.
Yeah, you feel paralyzed.
Absolutely. That's the exact word. Yeah. And then now I want to see that link to coping mechanisms, and what's your take on all of that? Because I do see a huge connection there. I see it with myself, I see it with clients, that need, that want. And based on your expertise and experience, what would you say is that connection, and why do people become so reliant on it over the years?
So when we are struck with trauma, we have any sort of traumatic experience, whether it is acute, whether it's chronic, or whether it's complex trauma, or whether it's to do something with, sexual abuse as a child, whatever sort of trauma that you may be in, a relational trauma, it actually affects your style of coping. And most of the times, the inner suffering and the inner canvas is so troubled and is so complicated and is so much of a mess that individuals don't really know what to do and how to deal with this internal war that's happening within your system. So some of them dissociate. That's one of the coping mechanisms. And it helps. And for most of the times when you're growing up, you will use certain coping mechanisms. Example, like some of my clients have parents who have been, in the name of discipline, have been hitting their children up until the age of 20. So they kind of like normalize it. and they don't know how to deal with this. So there is that thing. So they just dissociate from their body. So the mother is continuously slapping the daughter. She's like, okay, she's just in a freeze mode, standing stuck there. Okay, do what you want to get done with this. So there are maladaptive coping mechanisms that develop out of that need to survive. And initially, while you're growing up, it seems as if they're helping you a lot. Like a child just keeping quiet when someone's beating them up. It's a coping mechanism. Okay, so you won't hit me more if I don't resist, you know? But when you carry that long in your adult life as a coping mechanism, you enter a relationship that is toxic and your partner is involved with all the domestic abuse that he can or she can. And you just are stuck in that toxic relationship for years, Yeah. So your coping style definitely gets affected, and it can also be addiction. It can be over-reliance on some compulsive acts that you want to see, but it's actually about the unexplained pain. So most of them develop these coping mechanisms as a way to protect themselves when they are children. But while they're growing up, these turn into some maladaptive patterns that are slightly complex or difficult to, or challenging to break or to change, but it is possible.
Yeah. The maladaptive patterns that you're referring to, do you see a theme amongst, say, sexual trauma or, physical trauma or abuse, neglect, loss? Do you see a common theme? For example, anyone that's gone through sexual trauma, I read somewhere that they sometimes end up being more promiscuous themselves. Right? It's a response. It's a way of getting control of what's happening to them. Or for me personally, food just numbed me to a different level, a very different level.
Right.
As an adult, I still sometimes get images of me as a child and being in that scenario. But do you see a pattern there amongst the different type of trauma and the reliance on coping mechanisms?
I have a different take on this in terms of like, okay, there are studies, the way you mentioned, that there is a correlation between different types of trauma and stuff. But with my clinical practice, I don't really rely on these studies. Okay. There's a reason, because every person has a unique story of trauma. Mm-hmm. That's why their responses are going to be very unique. Adaptive coping mechanisms are going to be extremely unique. So it's very important to understand that not all CSA or victims or as children will turn into promiscuity. There are different ways, like emotional eating is one of them. Body image issues is the other one. Or let's say now getting into a workaholic mode to prove yourself, intellectualization. So there are different ways in which people respond to trauma. So no themes, I would say, but there is a major factor that is very common in most types of trauma is the dissociation with the body, or the dissociation or not feeling the feelings. These are two important categories that definitely show up in almost all types of trauma.
Yeah.
And in CSA, more than promiscuity, I have observed it is the eating disorders. It is the way your relationship with food plays an extremely important role.
Yeah.
And that is also one of the common themes, if I have to put it, with my clinical experience, not based on any studies. And also with my work, with my nonprofit, we see that they have a very strange relationship with food. Either they are starving, either they are binging, either there's purging happening, either there's no interest in food at all. I mean, food is just food. They just keep on skipping meals. So the objective is not to lose weight or look thin. It's just giving up. So it's kind of passively suicidal in a way.
What would, in your opinion, is going through that individual's mind, whether they're binging or purging or choosing not to eat?
Right.
What is playing there? Is it absolute numbness for what's happened to me, or is it a sense of control? What is it that individual...
It is, Natasya, it's a very good question. The way I mentioned, it is very subjective, okay? There definitely is that sense of powerlessness, the sense of helplessness, the guilt, the shame, the anger, the resentment. And this is irrespective of any trauma that you take. But when you're talking about eating issues particularly, there is this need to, sometimes for some people, I want to just dissociate with my body. So I want to numb myself with eating and binging and, doing all of that. For some other people, it is like, I want to have control on my body, so I won't eat. I'm going to starve, and I'm going to punish my body. because it was involved in something that it shouldn't have. Because when trauma happens, any sort of trauma, kids generally turn to internalize it. And they start thinking that it is my fault. And it all begins there. It is my fault. Why didn't I say no? And especially when we talk about CSA victims, most kids are groomed into thinking that they are responsible for their situation because there is no help, there is no acceptance, there is no support around this very important topic. Nobody wants to talk about it in the families. And the reason why we probably weren't able to share it with our parents is because we thought in our own minds that anything to do with body, especially, like let's say if you see the Asian cultures, it's synonymous with shame, Natasya, right? So sex is shame, body is shame. So you have to be very you can't be open about talking about your own body parts. So all these factors kind of shape you, and through that trauma, again, they kind of put you into that zone where you want to, it's all about your relationship, your connect and your disconnect with your own body.
Yeah.
And how you want to navigate that. So some people will binge eat because that's how they think. I had one client who would binge eat in the hope that she would die with binge eating. She was obese, 100 plus, and it was such I would say, a very painful story that I had the honor to work with her. Mashallah, she's doing fine, alhamdulillah.
That's amazing.
But unless and until you don't address the root of your trauma, this complicated relationship, whether it's food, whether it's substance abuse, whether it's emotional dysregulation in general, whether it's your own self-esteem, is always going to be troubled.
I mean, you know that you hit the nail right on the head with the shame aspect. For myself, I see that for clients. And I still remember my mother's words to today. Went and I told her. I actually didn't even tell her. I went on social media. I was that bold about it. And I said, you know what, if I'm going to do it, I'm just going to rip the bandage off. And my mother reached out to me and she said, you really shouldn't have done that, Natasya. That was not good. And she said, don't worry, I won't tell your father. You know, and I was so broken. I was so broken because I said, people that I had not known my entire life said, I'm here, I support you, this happened to me. And your own family, right? I'm of Indian heritage. So it was very shameful that I had done something of that sort. Very shameful of, oh, I'm not going to tell your father. Having gone through therapy myself now, you know, my therapist told me, Natasya, you should probably get comfortable with the idea that maybe your mom also could have been a victim of trauma and that's the way she knew how to handle it the best, possibly. But for me at that moment, that's not what I wanted to hear. And hearing you speak and, you know, the women that you work with, how many of them are in that exact same position, the shame, the guilt. And then when we connect it to binge eating, it's the shame and the guilt after food that comes along. And it's crazy to think, it's honestly crazy to think that that's what people will put themselves through.
Very true. Very true. And when you talk about this shame and guilt, I would say it is induced through this cultural pressure, the resistance of the adults around the child, not accepting. Of course, I do understand there was a generation which probably didn't know how to talk about it or what to do and whatever. But I think this is one basic. When it is CSA, it's always someone close to the child who is involved, right? And the reputation of the family is prioritized. The suffering of the child is just not there in the priority list.
Yeah.
And that leads to this snowballing effect of, the child struggling alone, doesn't know what to do, whom to reach out to. And the shame that we have around our bodies, I would say, to be very honest, no matter which culture you belong, it's a global phenomenon. There's so much of shame around the body on how it needs to look, how it needs to be, how do we need to talk about it, what do we need to, what sort of relationship we need to have with it. There's so many influences. And this basic, I would say, dialogue or conversation around our body needs to be normalized. If we want to normalize this experience and say, and especially the victim blaming, that's one of the most disastrous thing that happens to trauma kids, where you are so much shaming the person who has gone through an experience rather than shaming the perpetrator. Imagine you lived so many years alone, struggling with that feeling, struggling with that pressure, disconnecting with yourself, then connecting with yourself, then again disconnecting, finding ways to overcome the suffering, the pain, the turmoil at times, and doubting yourself. Every step you're doubting yourself and you don't know what to do. So, yeah, we need to change this conversation. And that's exactly what I do with Cactus Foundation. We're trying to help parents. So very soon we'll be reaching 1 million parents, inshallah.
Wow, that's
2026.
amazing. Congratulations.
Inshallah, yes. Because adults need to take the responsibility. It was not your responsibility as a child, my dear, right? It was not my responsibility to protect myself. It was the adults around it, how they respond.
That's tough. I think if my mom would have said something of that sort, I would have been more accepting of it, I think, or I would have been able to move on better. In my situation, it happened to me 3 times in my life, 3 different men,
I'm so
you know.
sorry.
Thank you. And I have worked with so many therapists, I've worked with so many psychologists, and there's a common theme. And what they tell me is, you're a complex case. This is complex, you know, and you sit there as an individual, having struggled with food. You were speaking about parents. My mother used to hit us a lot, right? Specifically me. And I was that person in front just saying, it'll get over. And you listen to these complex cases and I was like, my God, like I got it from every end, you know? But the part that gets tough, and this is what hurts me the most, is the accepting of the responsibility, right? And bringing it back to the kids and parents. Are parents willing to accept that responsibility? Because in my situation, and I've seen it with friends, clients, parents don't want to. They don't want anything to do with it. But are you finding that a struggle, or is that getting easier? Or are they more open to it now, to accept that responsibility?
Before I answer your question, I just want to rephrase what you said, that most of the psychologists have said that you're a complex case. Can we rephrase that language and say, no, it's not, you are not a complex case. So your experience, or let's say your story, is complex and you are not responsible for it. So when you say, I'm a complex case, you're kind of putting yourself into that position of, you know, I did something to be there. No, you did not have a choice. There was no option. So can we rephrase that saying that, okay, my story has complex trauma. Or I'm a victim of complex trauma. I'm a survivor of complex trauma. That would be good.
I love that.
Thank you. And as far as parents are concerned, there is resistance, definitely. And you won't believe, in India, we work with all layers of the demographics. Like we have below poverty line, we have the farmers, we have daily wage earners, we have industrialists, we have doctors, we have the most educated lot. You won't believe the resistance comes from the elite and the most knowledgeable people in the industry, and not from this section of the crowd that you think belong to the below poverty line or are less educated, don't have access to resources.
Wow,
and when I talk about this internationally in different conferences and stuff, or when I have these discussions with my colleagues as well, they are very shocked. Because this is something you wouldn't expect. You're educated, but you are still resistant about the idea. I have, you can say, in our organization, I have a story where a daughter, the child, 15 years old, was sexually abused by different set of, I will not name the profession, very educated elite people. And the mother's trying to normalize saying, this happens in party, he was just drunk. So that is a very shocking thing. So for me, I need to work on this elite and the so-called educated class who don't have the courage to open up. Of course, young parents, I would say, are very open to this thought and they want to do something about it. And especially parents who have been through that experience themselves, when they get that sort of guidance, when they get this sort of, you can say hand-holding from our work, they definitely do well. But there is resistance, no doubt about it. There is a cultural resistance, there is a family resistance, there is a resistance because you know that it exists, but you don't want to address it because it's too difficult. I don't want to look at it because it's too dirty. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
That just shove it under the carpet. So there are so many homes that have this lumpy carpets full with stories of one abuser abusing generation after generation when it comes to the kids in the family.
Yeah. I always say it's like a Pandora's box. The moment you open
Yes,
it,
absolutely.
it just keeps flowing and flowing and flowing out. But, I love what you said there. I'm a survivor of complex trauma. Over time, it felt like, okay, if I pull this string, then it can just
I know.
go, and I can sit here now in front of you. For me, it took that. For someone else, maybe a woman, a man watching this right now and in their 30s, 40s, wherever they are, where does that person start? How do they start? What do they need to come to terms with? If they're in their house right now,
Right.
where do they start?
One is to, I would say, get some time off for themselves. Observe what is it that is very stressful in their lives right now. It can be a relationship, it can be work issues, it can be some other dynamic, it can be parenting, it can be just about your own self-worth. Every person has something that they need to work on. So if they can begin with that basic thing, what do I need to work on? And also, if you are listening to this, I want you to, I'm sorry if you've been through this experience, I want you to sit with yourself and acknowledge that this happened to you. I think that is also one of the most important steps, that this happened to me. Okay? And unless you liberated yourself, Natasha, when you acknowledged that it happened.
Yeah.
Not otherwise. And if you're waiting for someone to come and rescue you, that's never going to happen.
Yeah.
That's never going to. You just need to look into the mirror to find the answers and say, okay, this is me and this happened to me. And the next thing that you need to tell yourself, irrespective of what your experience was, because most of the times when people go through CSA, there are kids who in that process feel aroused. It's body, right? It feels that arousal and they assume or equate this arousal with, I liked it when this was done to me, which is not true, which is a false alarm in your system. Because that's what they say, right? If you were aroused, it means there was consent involved. So irrespective of what your story is, who is involved, how many times it happened, it's important that A, you acknowledge it. Second, you tell yourself loudly, shout it out in the mirror, hold yourself and just say, it was not my fault. I was just a child. So it was not, even if I was 17, I was a child. So the responsibility is on the other person, right? So you acknowledge it, you say that it's not your fault, and then you can sit down and make a list of things. How has it affected you? In what aspects? How has your view of the world changed? How do you view relationships? How do you view your parenting style? Did you emotionally numb yourself? What was the coping mechanism that you chose? Did you just repress that memory, suppress that emotion of discomfort? Are you smoking more? Maybe you're smoking so many packets a day and you're like, okay, it's just work stress. No, it's not work stress. There is something deeper happening. And we need to pause. So this pause in your life is very important. Mm-hmm. And once you have a list, you also need to have a mental health budget, is how I say. We, as a society, especially Indians and Asians, I see, they do not want to invest in therapy.
Yeah.
They don't want to invest in a professional advice when it comes to the mind, emotions, because what do? You just sit and talk with your clients? I'm sorry, no, we don't just do that.
Yeah.
We are qualified, we are licensed, we have our own expertise, just the way you go for a broken leg to a doctor to fix it. You go for your legal matters to a lawyer. You need to visit a qualified person to start doing the trauma work.
Yeah. And that's such a good point you bring up, because therapy in the Indian community, in the Desi community,
Absolutely.
is so frowned upon.
Yeah.
I remember I had a friend of mine definitely struggling with alcohol to a next level. And this was me 2 years into therapy. And I told her, I said, look, it's been life-changing for me. To you, it might seem that, oh no, I'm not crazy.
Right.
And I said, but for me, It has changed my relationship with food.
Absolutely.
Just having someone listen to you, not pointing
Exactly.
blame, not judging
You.
And I don't know, at the level of where the alcoholism was going was impacting our relationship, but you could see the resistance.
Yes.
And she's such an amazing woman. I know that if she got the help that she needed, it would have been, but it's that culture that no, there's no way we'll
Because
go.
we have been reinforced with this, right? If you cry, if you express your emotion, if you're too sensitive, that's not right. The world is too, you need to like be strong. You need to always have that brave front. So technically speaking, emotions are like the most, you can say, the least of the priorities when it comes to our cultures. So that's why you need to have a mental health budget. You need to fix at least, you need, if nothing, one session a week or one session a month is something that you can invest. You can postpone all your expenses. Don't buy those branded stuff for a year, but invest in therapy. That is going to get the glow, that is going to push you forward, help you excel, grow as an individual. So therapy is not just because you're weak. No, I'm sorry. Therapy is for your overall, like let's say growth, your emotional growth, your cognitive growth, and your physical growth as well, your spiritual growth as well.
Yeah. I want to look at this from two different angles, right? One with the body image, body confidence, body dysmorphia angle, and then one from the emotional eating angle. Because a lot of my viewers are ones that struggle with eating. And, I do see a pattern. I see a pattern with abuse in some shape or form in their childhood. And if that individual now is their coping mechanism is food, right? They've tried all these diets. They're failing, but they've not really tapped into the root cause. Where does that individual start? Because diet culture, and I speak about this again, they're playing on that.
Right.
They're playing on these victims.
Absolutely.
They've played on me for years.
Absolutely.
You are a failure. You're overweight. You can't work out. You can't eat properly. I was like, another diet that I failed. But my root cause was my abuse that led me to food.
Exactly.
And I really want to shout this from the mountains that you are not a failure just because you failed these diets. And on that aspect of things, how can this individual start understanding that concept? I am not a failure because I failed a diet.
Absolutely. It's a very beautiful question, and I think a very relevant one as well. Because most of the times when you struggle with food, when you struggle with your body image, you are only focusing on the body in the physical sense, to be very honest. And you're only focusing on the root as, that food is my problem. My body is my problem, food is the problem. So, okay, let me just go to a dietitian. So when you're just going to be trying different diets, honestly speaking, it is just going to make you feel more miserable is how I see it. If you want to really work, it has to be a combination of the psychological work that needs to go with it. Then you have a nutritionist, and then you have a dietitian or an eating coach, like, the way you're helping people with you, alongside you. But we need to approach this issue from all angles. It cannot just be, so if you're just looking at diet as a solution to your eating disorder, to your body image issues, I'm sorry, it will never work. And the message that you will be giving yourself is the way you said, I failed at this, I wasn't able to do this. Or, it just keeps on escalating and compounding to the actual stress that you already have. There's already a stress load that you've been carrying because of your trauma, because of your experiences. And now when you're not able to achieve that target, for that matter, you're now kind of, again, blaming yourself, and you feel as if you're not good for anything because the self-doubt and everything. So it's like a total crash down. So what's important is, I would say, there needs to be a balance in how you're approaching this. Good that you recognize that eating is a problem. That's the wonderful first step, I would say. That you recognize that for me, food is something that I use to cope with things, or to numb myself, to disconnect with myself, or it just makes me feel very good. Agreed. So that is the first step that you have taken. The second step, again, I cannot reiterate this enough. Your mental health is very important, because cortisol as a hormone is also responsible for the stress belly that you see, for the weight that you're trying every diet. And I have so many clients who follow it to the T, they are just They're just doing everything in the book, by the book. They're eating those many grams, and still the weight is stuck. Still, they're not able to see the transformation in the body. And when I've worked with them through the somatic experiencing, through mindfulness techniques, or through psychodynamic approaches on the trauma, we've seen that their hormones have regulated. They get back their periods. The body starts responding very beautifully. And you literally see the correlation between how you need to manage your stress through and the roots of the problem, that is the trauma work. Alongside, I'm not saying no, alongside, you definitely need an expert with food to help you with how your body is going to respond. So you can't not meet your body and say, okay, this is what I'm going to do for my body. So the therapy space actually allows you to get inside your body. And the way I see it is we have 3 different bodies. We have an emotional body, we have a physical body, and we have a psychological body. Mm-hmm. And it's my duty as an individual to kind of make sure that all these 3 homes are well maintained, aesthetically there. I'm spending almost an equal amount of time everywhere and making this work. Yep. So when trauma happens, with emotional eating also, we are just here. So now, right now, even when I'm speaking, I ask you, can you just take a deep breath? Can you feel the ground? You just dropped into your body right now. Otherwise, both of us were just talking from here. And when you are having that complex relationship with food and body, you are just here. So it's not going to work down. Yeah. It's very important to, yes, you said, we need the trauma work as the base, and we need a nutritionist, a dietitian, a coach like you, who's expert in dealing with these scenarios to guide you through, to place you on that track.
Absolutely. I always say coaching and therapy go hand in hand.
Absolutely.
One doesn't replace the other.
Absolutely.
I provide, the emotional support that they need, the safe space to open up, their relatability on what you've been through, and the mindset that you can get there. It's a long journey. Yes. Sometimes you can, and you keep going, but touching those deeper rooted issues, right? Trauma, sexual trauma, physical abuse, mental abuse, loss of a parent.
Right.
This is something that needs to get explored.
Absolutely.
And, people will, you can see the resistance. You can see they don't want to go there. They don't want to touch it.
Because it's uncomfortable.
Exactly. I
tell my clients, so when you come for therapy with a psychologist, it's like we're going to have, especially the trauma work, is more like, we're trying to have a surgery without anesthesia, because you are feeling, you're supposed to experience that discomfort for you to kind of do something about it and find ways to deal with it, give it a closure, move forward.
Yeah.
So it's uncomfortable, but I salute all my clients in the last 2 decades who have this courage of meeting a psychologist, meeting me, coming in and out. It requires a lot of courage to get into therapy.
Yeah, absolutely. You can say that again. I remember having one therapy session, and it was so intense. It drained me. I had to sleep for like 3 hours after I was done. And I remember telling the lady, I said, if I knew what I was walking into today, I don't know if I would have come in. I don't know. But, she said, Natasya, you were ready today. We've had 10 sessions before. You were not ready.
Exactly.
You did not wish to open up to that level. She's like, today you were ready.
Right.
And she's like, no wonder you're tired. Your body's tired from years.
Right.
So I think the example that you gave, this like surgery without anesthesia, it's exactly what it is.
Right. And when you are tired, it's not, so most clients, when they have an intense session, they're like, Nusrat, I was feeling I just wanted to sleep. I never sleep. I'm always on time. I wanted to rest, and I don't know this. I've never got this feeling. And I'm like, excuse me. So therapy, real therapy happens when you have a session with your therapist, you walk out of that door, and again, when you enter the door for the next session, that gap, that window outside. So the processing, the brain is still processing the experiences that you have shared. It's trying to make sense of it. And that's why that exhaustion. Yeah. And it's communicating, right? Like with this client of mine that, oh my God, you are such a workaholic that you don't even want to rest for a while. And I also blame the normalization of the hustle culture. Oh, my day is packed. I don't have time and I cannot do this, or I don't want to take my time off. So I think we need to really Get off that, our list, the hustling. I don't believe in that. I have caused a lot of harm to my body because until I did not recognize my own story of abuse until 31, I was only up here doing, just working like crazy and like, I don't know what it was. And it caused, like, I went through 7 surgeries almost. And I realized that's because I didn't pay attention to my body at all.
Yeah.
And especially with CSA cases or trauma cases where people sometimes, I would never eat. I ate lesser than what my friends would eat. And then, when you go into these gatherings and stuff, people are like, oh, I know you love to eat, because they look at your size, they look at your body, and they make such comments. And you're like, I don't eat. I barely eat, but I'm still puffing up. Why? Because of the stress hormone. And it took me a while to get back into that mode of probably taking care of my body, checking in with my body.
Yeah.
How many of us just step out of the bathroom after we have a bath? How are you doing today? Hey, body, how are you doing today? We don't do that.
Yeah.
Right? So this is a very important aspect.
Yeah. I'm so glad you brought up hustle culture, because I see it and I'm guilty of it. I won't sit here and judge. I am so guilty of it. I get so caught up in doing everything. And you then realize, my God, my body, I can't do it anymore. So I have started listening a little bit more. If I cannot, I used to be a proud member of the 5 a.m. club.
Yeah.
And now it's like, no, if I cannot wake up at 5 a.m.,
yes,
I cannot wake up at 5 a.m.
Right.
It's okay. You can sleep, you can rest. And I think it's so, so important. There's a theme that I noticed with women in particular, right? They'll feel a sensation coming up. Something's not right. Something needs to get addressed. And so then they dive into work even more.
Yeah.
And when we go through coaching sessions, and I'll say, but this is not you. The way you're eating in this past 3 days, it's not you. It seems like there's something deeper. But then in their head, the way it processes is, no, I need to do even more.
Yeah.
How can that woman listening to this probably right now navigate through that? You can feel there's something that needs addressing, but in their head, it's processing as more work. How can they slow down? What can they do to give it that attention that it needs before it's too late?
Yeah, it's again a very common theme that I see with my clients as well. So for some people, avoidance by using work or more work, I would say, as a strategy to avoid something that is really troubling them. Let's say I have an issue with my partner and there are so many things that I need to address. Maybe I'm on the verge of going through a divorce or giving him a divorce, but it's so difficult for me to digest that this relationship is not working, that non-acceptance, that you can say, I just want to disconnect from it. So I kind of put myself into more work, because when I'm working, I'm not thinking about it. Mm-hmm. So you're just kind of replacing those moments with more work, more eating, more shopping, hoarding more things, or just kind of socializing, as if there's no tomorrow. So these things do happen. So whenever you are getting this urge of, okay, let me do more, I think on an average for every person, I recommend that throughout the day, at least 4 to 5 times, you need to step back, you need to take a micro pause, and you need to check in with your nervous system and reset it.
Yeah.
By accessing your senses, by asking yourself, what am I doing? Is this the real thing that I want to do? So that checking in happens. Checking in happens like simple things like having a glass of water is also that pause. Looking outside the window and saying, okay, that's a beautiful scene. To get into the here and now, basically.
Yeah.
So that micro pauses definitely help you to, slow down. So we often kind of want to be volatile, dynamic, in the go. We don't want to cut that speed off. Because I know if I stop, I'm going to crash. If I say no, I'm going to just fall back. And I don't know if I'll be able to get up or no. So, which means that again, having a therapist with you is highly recommended, especially in today's times. And it helps a lot, or maybe a support system, a friend who offers that safe space to listen to what's happening. A journal, a diary, just write Dear Diary and start writing what's working on, and you get to the root of it. So having that ritual of saying, no, I am going to pause no matter what. And when I teach the pause technique to my clients. Most of the times I've seen that, there's one of my clients, he lost his wife all of a sudden, unfortunately. And just before the funeral, he just took a pause and had a coffee before he went for the funeral. And he said that was such an empowering thing to do. People judged me for it, that I literally said, wait, let me have my coffee. And people judged me like left and right, that what is this man doing? The funeral's about to start and this man wants to have a coffee. And he said, no, I wanted to spend that time with my wife, give her that goodbye that she deserves, because I loved having coffee with her. So that pause of saying that this is something my system needs. And in your mind, you may be thinking, I don't need this pause because there's so much of work that I need to complete. There's so many to-dos that I need to check. But trust me, your body is continuously working. It's working even while you're asleep. Mm-hmm. So it needs that pause. So pause can be anything: watching flowers, smelling coffee, having coffee, ice cubes, holding ice cubes in your hand, anything that is going to refresh your senses.
I love that. Thank you for sharing all those examples. There is one last topic I do want to, I want your expert opinion on this, because I don't want to end without this. Given in the world that we live in right now with weight loss injections, GLP-1, semaglutide, tirzepatide, and people struggling with eating disorders, everyone's talking about the benefits. They're talking about the side effects. The problem that I see that's arising, and no one is touching this topic in the manner that it needs to get touched on, is individuals struggling with binge eating, struggling with binging and purging, are now being given these medications off the counter as a solution to their weight, right?
Yes.
To me, I look at this as a temporary fix. We're not hitting the root cause whatsoever. They're losing weight, so in their head, they're getting that
better.
Exactly. They're getting better. They're getting that appeal. The confidence is coming, so they're thinking they're healed, when in reality, what had to be touched and addressed never was.
Yes.
100%
I agree with you, Natasha. Even before you complete that question, 100% I'm in agreement with it. And I think there are a few favorites, especially here in UAE, Manjaro. I mean, it's like a rave party everywhere. Everyone's on Manjaro. And when I try to check in with my clients as well, okay, so what time do you get up? What do you eat? And how do you progress your day? I'm on Manjaro. I don't eat. I don't have my breakfast. Just one meal. I don't feel like eating. I don't feel like drinking. And I think, yes, there is this very scary trend, I can say. So, and the way you mentioned, it is just a quick fix. It is going to give you some results in the beginning. Then it's going to plateau down. Again, so just like you mentioned in our previous question, right, that I am a failure because I tried this doesn't work on me.
Yeah.
It's not that some measure or some remedy is not working on you. It's that you're not working on the root problem. And the entire world is, in a way, conditioned to believe that it's like if you have fever, you just have a paracetamol and you're fine. So even the most allopathic medicines also, they just kind of numb or suppress the symptoms. So when you're having quick fixes like this, you're suppressing the system. In case if you're going ahead with these quick fixes, it's very important to educate yourself with what are the changes in the lifestyle that needs to be sustained, consistent. Let's say you're not even doing the trauma work. But in alignment with that, what are the changes that I need to get into my system so that it is a sustainable way of being healthy? My perception of weight loss is very different. I perceive weight loss or body image or these food struggles with, I want to do something that is sustainable. Mm-hmm. I don't want to do something that is, okay, I do it for a month to get the results. And then again, I'm like, oh, what do I do now? So I want something that is very sustainable. So portion control is sustainable. Having proteins and having a balanced meal is sustainable. Mindful eating is sustainable. Cooking your own meals and eating is sustainable. Movement is sustainable. Exercise is sustainable. And so even if this thing will just help you to probably get on track. But what's going to sustain is your discipline. And for me, discipline is self-love. Am I loving myself?
Yeah.
Self-care. So that connection is very important. And the way you mentioned, yes, I have so many faces just like crossing my mind right now on how they are literally, I would say, there is this, in a way, this abuse of these techniques, drugs, injections. And then again, you have a sense of failure. But again, address the root cause. address what it is, and lifestyle changes they need to be sustainable.
Absolutely.
So if I start running a marathon now and I'm like, okay, I need to run to lose my weight. What happens to my knees? No, I need to have something that is sustainable.
Overall, yeah, I agree. And again, thank you for sharing those examples. And thank you for being on here today and just being so insightful. I knew I was going to get emotional on this one. I try to be as strong, as courageous I can be.
You are strong.
But
come on, you need to tell your FNF members that, right? If you weep, that's a sign of strength as well.
Absolutely.
It's not a sign of weakness at all.
And thank you for I feel like we're gonna have to do another episode. I can feel that.
To come.
I can feel that happening. There's so many questions that are brewing that I feel like we've just touched the surface.
Right.
But I can't thank you enough again. And if you just want to share with everyone, if they want to work with you, get guidance, support, where can they reach you?
Very important thing. So I want to make 2 different announcements. Very soon, I will be launching my own parenting community. The whole idea of this parenting community and my programs is that the trauma. Because every client that I get, there is some issue with the parenting, some gaps in the parenting that need to be addressed. And I don't think so we are talking enough about it. So I decided that if I want to work with the community, I want to build a community of parents who will be trauma-informed while raising their kids, so that the damage and the wounds that you and I have been through, not just sexual abuse, there's so many forms of neglect, emotional, physical, the pressure, all of that, if we can help our next generation with it, that'll be great. So on my page, Ask Rahat, we'll be getting the details. And in Dubai, I work with a wonderful team of psychologists, and you can book your session with me at HRIC Dubai, that is Human Relation Institute and Clinics in Dubai. And I'm available online and I'm available face-to-face as well. And always you can write into me and I can guide you on how we can collaborate. And I would love to come again. It was an amazing, I would say, a very candid, amazing discussion. And thank you for trusting me, Natasha.
My absolute pleasure. Thank you again, Nusrat. Thank you, everyone. Please catch the episode and let me know your thoughts on what you'd like to know or hear more from Nusrat. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining us on Take the Weight Out of Weight Loss podcast. We hope you find the information and strategies discussed helpful on your journey with emotional eating and weight loss. Feel free to let us know what topics you'd like to see covered in future episodes. And see you next week for a brand new episode.